You are now listening to Conscientization 101, an online magazine combining reflection, music, and action through independent media. I
think that the only way that we're going to realize freedom, justice, equality, decent living for people is if there's a complete change. Everything has got to be turned around, and that's a revolution. It's a revolution.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Conscientization 101 podcast. I'm your host, Zari Sundiata. On this episode, we feature excerpts from an interview we did with Dr. João Costa Vargas in Austin, Texas. And if you know anything about João, you know he probably wouldn't like us to call him Dr. João, but since he did the work, we're going to give him that title and we're going to keep it moving. So, Dr. João Costa Vargas, this is like an updated interview we did with João, because if you listen to our podcast regularly, you know we interviewed him in 2011. So with all the, different things happening in the world, people moving and shaking and all the political machinations, we decided that it was time to revisit João and get his take on all these various formations. So during the interview, we're going to talk to him. We start off by talking to him about his new piece called Black Disidentification, the 2013 protests, I'm going to try to say this word, Rolezinhos, and racial antagonism in Post-Lula Brazil. We also posted this piece on our site under news, and we encourage you to go and read it, pick it up, and that way you can have some insight into what we're talking about. It'll give you more of an understanding of where he's coming from and all that good stuff. You can download it, you can share it, all that good stuff. So he allowed us to be able to use it, so let's use it. And in addition to that piece, we talk about things such as like Black autonomy, the so-called Black Lives Matter movement, the rise of consumerism in Brazil, the role of academia, the pitfalls of multiracial coalitions for Black people, culture, the role of sports as an imperialist tool, and the benefits of doing structural analysis. And we talk about all these in great detail. So I named what we talked about in the interview, which was just under 2.5 hours. But if you want to hear all these topics, you have to hear the whole full interview. So these are just excerpts. So, if you listen to the podcast, you know how to get the full interview. Just to visit our subscription benefits page. For people who are new, visit our subscription benefits page on our website, and we'll give you more details about that at the end of the podcast. Also, we wanted to let you know that during the interview, you're going to hear me say, Zari, really, really happy. We edited this into the interview because throughout, João would refer to me using my given name, and Zari is my chosen name. So to maintain continuity, we edited my chosen name into the interview. So that's why you hear me saying Zari. So we want you to also know that we're going to come up with some really exciting changes for the site. We're doing some work that'll make our current subscribers really, really happy, and it'll give everybody who is listening to the podcast, who've maybe subscribed to the podcast or just kind of support by listening to that, it'll give you much more access to C101 content. So stay tuned for periodic updates as we continue to make conscientization a more open source of revolutionary content. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start playing our interview with João. Hello, João. How are you?
Good, and you?
I'm fine. How are you this afternoon? This is afternoon, yes. Now it is.
Better with you folks around.
That's good. It is always good to talk to people who know what imperialism means, at least.
I'm going to try to learn it from you.
All right, let's start off. So throughout your books and in your piece that you recently wrote, Black Disidentification, the 2013 protests. How do you say this word? Rolezinhos?
Oh, Rolezinhos.
Totally off. Rolezinhos.
But that's a tough one.
And racial antagonism in Post-Lula Brazil. You elaborate on a common theme which breaks down our relationship to the state as an antagonism. You know, you have many examples where you write about and you talk about how the state needs to continue our subjugation and our domination to exist. And we wanted you to start off by talking about the contradictions involved in the reforms being made in Brazil, where African people are gaining more access to credit, monetary stipends, things like that, on the one hand, while on the other hand, we continue to be, you know, basically killed in the streets by the police, just like anywhere else on the planet. What are those, and even white civilians, what are the contradictions, you know, involved in that?
Before you give the answer, I also wanted to say one of the things that I want you to bring, like you said, the blaring contradictions, because one of the things you talk about is that there are top-down reforms, which, you know, the state gives and they determine that, and instead of getting like input, like I think you just said that from the what the people need, they don't have any way of shaping that. So that's one of the things you talk. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, thank you,
Zari.
and James, for the question. Thank you also for engaging those texts so closely. You must be the only two people in the world who do that. The question in Brazil is really complex. When you mention the state and its relation to Black folks, one thing we need to look at is the fact that over the last 30 years, I would say, the state has made a concerted effort in attracting Black leadership into its cadres. So what you see in Brazil, starting with the 1988 Constitution up until today, is that Black folks who started organizing in the streets, who started semi-autonomous organizations in civil society, have been progressively brought into the state as counselors, as functionaries of the state, and sometimes as ministers. Now in Brazil you have, for example, this minister-like bureaucracy called the Secretariat for Racial Justice that has been run for the last, 3 Workers' Party administration by key members of the Black movement. So the Black movement has, in some way, the ear of the Brazilian state. And the Black movement, together with allies, is able to set an agenda that the folks on the ground are not able to. So this is what's going on. So Brazil now has this very progressive affirmative action policy. Brazil has had this very aggressive program of redistributing wealth and income. And at the same time, because the Black presence is now at the level of the state, it is pretty much absent at the level of the streets. That means that police abuse, the continued patterns of medical malpractice, the continued isolation of Black folks happens at the same time in which you have these policies that are never going to happen again. So what happened in Brazil during the first 2 Lula administrations and the Dilma administrations is that Black folks have been effectively lifted out of poverty in a way that's unprecedented. Black folks have benefited from affirmative action policies like never before. So universities that have been lily white in Brazil forever are now places with a substantial Black presence. That's very impressive. At the same time at which Black folks are still being killed left and right like flies by the police and by neglect. So that's part of the whole contradiction that we are dealing with in Brazil. But that's a great question, and it is one of the dilemmas of how to address anti-Blackness from the perspective of the state. Is that even possible?
Well, I mean, you kind of answered the question, right? Because the thing about it is, I think it was, if I'm recalling correctly, I think it was Kwame Ture said that Black power is not Black visibility, right? So, I mean, right now, like you said, in Brazil, it's kind of having the same type of political situation for Black folks, kind of that we Africans over here has experienced. Here it is. We have all these representatives in the colonial state called the United States. But if you look at ownership of property, collective ownership of property, and you look who owns our neighborhoods, if you go in there, especially we being from Houston, I'm pretty sure something similar. And well, I'm being from Austin, but living in Houston, you know, a lot of Asians own and control the business economy in our community. So when you look at that, and then you look at these politicians working with the state, can they address a state? And especially like Brazil, when you look at what the Portuguese did and how they shaped that, I mean, they didn't really even develop anything. They were just shipping us Africans in by the boatload over there, you know, just get another one. And so now, like I remember you said 4 years ago that everybody's eyes was on Brasilia. Everybody's eyes was on Brasilia because, you know, they saw as some type of hope in the state, so.
Yeah, so the parallel between the U.S. and Brazil, I think that's a really good one. A very schematic picture can be offered of the U.S. civil rights movement, which is the following. At some point, round about the 50s, in what's called today the civil rights movement, you could distinguish a nationalist strand. You could distinguish an Afrocentric strand. You could distinguish a revolutionary strand, all mixed together with the more integrationist, the more settled strand. And what happened was that when the civil rights movement became, quote unquote, successful, it got taken over by those who could dialogue with the state.
That's right.
Lawyers, professional organizers, and the exact same thing that's happening today in Brazil happened in the U.S.
That's right.
In other words, the struggle moved away from the streets and into the courts. And as soon as it does that,
that's right,
the lawyers take over, the language changes, and it's about negotiating with the state that is arguably an anti-Black state by definition. So Black folks begin to knock on the door of a house, a polis that is founded on Black death. So that's a huge contradiction. It's more or less the same contradiction that
Zari
pointed to at the beginning. So Derek Bell talks a lot about this process, and that's who I have in mind when I'm drawing this scheme. But the nationalist perspective is absent. The revolutionary perspective is absent precisely because, ironically, the civil rights movement was quote unquote successful.
Right. It wasn't, you didn't see, they came out of that. They don't discuss the Black Panther, the BLA, Sundiata Acoli, and all these people, George Jackson, these great theoreticians in prison. You instead, you know, we might get books that I'm kind of critical of, is like even Michelle Alexander's, you know, the mass incarceration, when George Jackson is telling you what happened in Blood in My Eye to me, what's happening in Soledad, brother. We want to forget these brothers and sisters because, you know, they don't look too clean in the state's eyes, a prisoner. They got that tarnish on it, but people that can kind of dialogue. It's like we have to learn stuff all over. And then when we go to Brazil, right? I remember something that John Henry Clark said. He said he had just came back from Brazil, and he said it's the most saddest thing he had ever seen in the 80s. He said, that is a Black country. He said they could overtake that country overnight if they just knew they were Black.
Absolutely.
We could take it, and he goes, they have everything there to launch Pan-Africanism. They got land, everything. Yeah. But he said they don't know who they are.
So in 2001, I was involved with the popular movement of favelas in Rio. And at that point, the local favela leadership was able to mobilize 63 Black communities, 63 favelas. And one of the phrases that one of the leaders, Humba, used to repeat a lot is, "We will descend to the asphalt to get what's ours." And at that point, that was heard as crazy, that was heard as threatening, and that was heard as an invitation for looting and for violence against white folks. So needless to say, that movement didn't last long. Humba was threatened by death. He ended up in Austin. And that's a good example of how this discourse of confrontation with the state, confrontation with private property has no place in this day and age. And so we are dealing with a political landscape that assumes that integration and multiraciality is possible. That's the saddest part. That's why you go to a place like Brazil, and most Black folks are still imagining a place at the table, literally and figuratively. Black folks to this day will not sit at the table with white folks. I know this for a fact. I take students, Black students from the US to Brazil. I take Black students from poor communities to privileged communities in Brazil. White folks will refuse to sit with Black people and eat together. They will refuse to share the same elevator. They will refuse to share the same washing machine. And the list goes on. And you talk with Black folks and white folks, and they will tell you, poker face, that doesn't exist and they never noticed it. So that's the lay of the land. These forms of obvious and deep anti-Black racism exist on a daily basis, and yet white folks and Black folks alike will often negate it. They'll say, I've never noticed this, even though folks are engaging in those types of things on a daily basis. I spoke with, this time, just a few months ago, with a really well-known sociologist, leftist, and otherwise perfectly well-informed, intelligent person. And I was having this same conversation. And he was telling me that he never noticed those kinds of dynamics in his neighborhood. He lives in a privileged area of Rio. And he said that he never noticed these forms of anti-Black racism. So how can somebody who's supposedly well-learned, intelligent, and has access to all kinds of information not notice these basic facts? And Black folks are not that different. They will go through these forms of terrible discrimination and yet still not only negate them, but expect a future where they will be equal. And this is against all evidence. Folks are dying like flies. Black folks are dying like flies to this day in Brazil. The homicide rates for Black folks is increasing. Homicide rates caused by the police is increasing against Black folks at the same time at which homicide rates for white folks is decreasing. This is the ultimate proof that even though you may have policies that work at the level of public security, for example, so let's educate our police so that they don't kill as much, they will stop killing poor whites, but they will not stop killing poor Blacks and Black folks in general. So that's another part of the contradiction you pointed to at the beginning.
Whoa, and we're going to continue in that trajectory. This is Conscientization 101, João Costa Vargas. That's right. Y'all remember last interview I had trouble saying João. Now I'm a little old and wiser. João. It's the equivalent of John for you Anglo-Saxons out there. All right. we kind of moving in the same, one of the same direction. What you're talking about? We got like the colonial state, which we talking about in this particular case, Brazil, and its representatives. You know what you just talked. They talk about they do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, what they call Brazilian jiu-jitsu, just like how they claim in Brazil capoeira, when we all know that was us whooping that ass, and then they tried to say, oh, it's everybody's. We just like rap is an American art form now, right? They switch polarities, and and one of the things, for example, when you talk about the idea of revolutionary Pan-Africanism, it's becoming more prevalent as a goal, as a struggle. If it looks like it's becoming prevalent as a goal, what they are going to do is they will define Pan-Africanism as the ability to consume goods fashioned in an African style, and they'll probably even be produced by non-African people, made in China. See what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what they'll do. They'll say, oh, y'all want Pan-Africanism? We got neoliberalism, okay? So I read a book by George Reed Andrews, and it describes this phenomenon. His book is called Afro-Latin America, 1800 to 2000. And I want to talk about something when he quotes an African in Brazil. The academic term is Afro-Brazilian. But an African in Brazil entrepreneur, or I could probably say a Negro. But he said the best way, this is the Negro in Brazil. He said the best way to be a black militant is to be a success. Have y'all not heard that in America? Listening audience, my Africans over here. We want people. Sellouts say the same thing. Andrew also states in the book, he also states in the go on in the book, he says, as the black middle class continues to expand, those of its members who wish to express their negritude, y'all need to look up Cesar and Senghor, right? But, okay, I'll digress. Negritude have tended to do so not through political action, but rather through the pleasures of consumption. More specifically, consumption of quote-unquote black clothes, music, hairstyles, and art. One of the things you talk about in Black Disidentification, your piece that we read, you say please, brother, break it down.
Rolezinhos.
There we go. Are mobilized primarily as consumer-minded protests, whereby the young people who participate are primarily contesting the limitations imposed on them and their ability to shop. Because the problem with black folks just being in the mall, right. We know we was talking about Holland Mall. They done closed that down. I heard my nephew said they closed it down. Right. They don't want them black folks there. Texas Relays. Andrews also quotes Robert Malo. I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Malo. He's the publisher of a magazine called Roca Brazil. Even Beyonce was on the cover of Roca Brazil. We wrote a piece about that. Y'all should check it out if y'all get y'all subscription, get your mind right. He stated, this is what he stated, and Amos Wilson talks about this too. Blacks are voracious consumers. They spend, for example, more money on clothes than whites do because they need to signal clearly their social position. I'm not black, I'm a human. So that's not a quote, that was me, people, I'm sorry. This appears to create a paradox whereby the new black is to unite around the idea of moving away from blackness and its supposed limitations, i.e. not being, like welcome in the mall and stuff like that, by acquiring goods meant to indicate and display higher status. And so I want to ask you, João, what's your take on this assessment and, this new black middle class and signaling, status? And we do it over here. We're wearing polo and all that stuff. Because I remember in 2011, I think I alluded to this earlier, because you was like, it's exciting time. And I don't know where it's going to go. And your last words for the interview, but I think I know where it's going to go. So you could talk about this new, and yes, you can add something.
Also, because we just got through talking about it, how we were talking about how we haven't acquired land. Like, can you tie that into the answer? Because I think that, like James was saying, is because our consciousness is so focused on consumerism. That's why we haven't acquired land. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon, and it's connected to the first question.
Zari.
Last. So on the one hand, you have all these black folks with unprecedented access to resources. That's the Workers' Party administration for you in a nutshell. Amazing, unprecedented. Folks don't know what happened in Brazil yet. So that hasn't been written. That analysis is not there. But it is a watershed moment in the history of humanity, period. I have no problem saying that. So you have these young folks now with, well, now not so much, but 2 or 3 years ago with jobs, with disposable income, and they're going, this is great. So what are we going to do? White folks have been going to malls and consuming and gathering the entire lives. Now that we have little money, we want to do that too. And what they soon realize is that in spite of their economic citizenship, they have no recognition as a fellow member of the nation writ large. So when they started gathering in shopping malls, the reaction that they caused in the media, among pundits, and across the board was one that signaled to me that you do not belong, even though you may have the resources. This is not your place. This is not an entitlement that you have, even though you may have the money in your pocket. And in the word, what was being communicated is that you are not a first-class citizen, and you will never be a first-class citizen. Now, the question becomes even more interesting when you bring up the issue of land. Black folks are constantly reminded of their second-class citizenship. They are constantly reminded that their lives is worth nothing. One way to combat that is through traditional forms of political mobilization. You protest, you get together, and you say you call out the state and you call out civil society. You're a bunch of anti-Black racists. We want in, we want in. You keep knocking on the door. And what you do while knocking on the door is actually making the door and the state legitimate.
Yep.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
You're saying you are a legitimate interlocutor.
Yep.
That's right.
Meanwhile, your folks are dying.
Yep.
That's
Meanwhile, your entry into society, into the mall, is being denied on a daily basis. And you're negotiating with a negotiator that has no interest in and is unable, totally unable to negotiate Black folks' humanity, because that's the premise of the state.
Tell them, João, they won't listen to me.
So the issue of land is really interesting. Yet, to get to that point, Black folks will purchase land autonomously and run these autonomous communities. As you pointed out from the beginning, they need to be conscientious of their condition as Black folks and as folks who, by definition, will never have full membership, be it in Brazil, be it in the US, be it anywhere in the world. So here we are in 2015, and it's a little disheartening that we are still knocking on that same old door. And we still want in, and we think that economic improvement, which I have nothing against. I'm all for improvement of people's lives, don't get me wrong. But we tend to equate that with membership and with the recognition of full humanity. And therein lies the problem.
That's right.
So what I'm saying here is that the knocking on the door should still exist. It should be there. I think that work needs to be done. It's not the work that I want to be engaged in, but it needs to be done. We need to get out of out of the shit, literally speaking. You mentioned your trip to Venezuela, but Black folks throughout the world live on top of their own shit.
Yeah.
And for a reason. We are constantly excluded. We have no access to all the benefits that citizens have access to.
Right.
So that work needs to be done. Yet it cannot be equated to the greater work, arguably the most important work, which is finding ways to own our humanity. And that work cannot be attached to the state. The state is the entity that will constantly negate your humanity.
That's right. Exactly.
And most non-Black identified folks will also negate your humanity on a constant basis. Which is not to say that Black folks don't do that too, because we do that just as well, right? So that's where the question of land comes in. I think that the question of land needs to be one that is attached to attempts of reclaiming our autonomy, taking care of our own business, and finding ways to become citizens of the world without the permission of the state and of anti-Black folks. So that's how I see the issue of the land. It's a matter of strategizing ways of becoming self-possessed and becoming full human without the legitimation by the state.
Right, exactly.
So that's a tough one. And it's not a joke. I keep telling my students who are otherwise clever folks, they are energized. It's the new generation. The Black Lives Movement is out there. It has a bunch of interesting aspects. And I keep telling them, the day you are able to live without your cell phone, without your AC functioning, and without your toilet functioning, you may be ready to start thinking about an autonomous life. But until and unless that day comes, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
When you look at me, what do you see? The answer's nothing. I have no feelings about you one way or the other. You're like lint or a bottle cap. You're just a thing to remove.
My life in America, land of free ice cream and perpetual sunshine.
Me, couple of my homies, stop and represent Shoney's. Trying to fuck with these shoulders. Thank the Lord they don't know me. We from public house, we turn the shit to 3,000. You can say we hood, fit it under my hood. We just minding our business. Coppers stopping and friskers. Young, Black, and ambitious, so I guess that's acting suspicious. Demonize my culture, criminalize my kin. Jesus Jones done told you, they hating on my skin. Hit the AM PM, cop gas 3 black miles. Cracker run up on me, telling me to turn my shit down now. I roll my windows back up, turn the music back up. Cause we ain't bother nobody, these crackers fucking with us. This asshole gon' lose it if I keep playing my music. We just some high school students, and this the way that we do it. We ain't fucking with you and don't know why the fuck is you shooting. Stand your ground and sounding confusing when you the one that's pursuing. These 3 degrees ain't you can be a professor. PhDs mean nothing. You can be a professor at a prestigious university. A famous actress, athlete. You can be the president of the United States. It don't matter. When you're Black, they see you as nothing.
Police say their 17-year-old son was shot to death after an argument over loud music.
Try to cop a box of cigarettos, put a couple of spots on my halo. Couple of blocks from the bodego. Cops stop to get his hate on. I'm Black and that's who they hate on. In fact, the cracker ain't take long to shoot to kill, and I'm unarmed. Said he fear for life, but got a gun on. I fast to pray that when I'm gone, my daddy spends his life filling morgues with cops galore. His daughter's sons, his wife. No civil suits, no protests, no hollow speech from the protest. Just hollow points and broken joints. My Black life is worth no less. These 3 degrees ain't nothing. These PhDs mean nothing. If you ain't 5 children from that door, should just be a cop yourself. Don't matter. If you're Black, they see you the same way they see the gangster thug or dope dealer. They see you as nothing.
Everybody want me to be calm. Do you know how them bullets hit my son? What they did to his body as they hit his body?
I ain't no gangster, never been no thug, never 3-point average. I mean, my GPA done jumped to 4.0, but I was good at 3.8. So why these crackers be hating? They quick to say that I'm banging. They criminalize my friends so they can shoot and claim self-defense. They shooting me with impunity, but they soon to see what they did. He was only 12, just a kid. She never reached the 8th year. He was at a Walmart when a cracker called saying, for my life I'm in fear. They can take my life when they scared, so they pretend to be scared. Being black, it ain't safe here. You can ignore the facts and be clear. I'm just being sincere. This here is where the sense is. I just want to go home. Please leave me the fuck alone. 6 cops illegal choke holes. Cell phones capture videos. Now I can't breathe and I'm gone. Police corruption exposed. Still no trial and I'm 6 feet down on a sea spray over my soul. These 3 degrees ain't nothing. These PhDs mean nothing. It's
12-year-old playing cops and robbers with a toy gun. 70-year-old walking with a cane. Man, woman, or child, it don't matter. If you black, they see you as nothing.
Please tell me why you come in my house. Tell me why you came in my house like that. You killed my grandbaby, baby.
I'm nothing. That's what I am. I don't know nothing. I don't have nothing. I'm nothing. I'm nothing.
You know, that's one of the things it's like about the whole Black Lives Matter thing. It's almost like you're knocking on the door for a house that is almost about to crumble anyway. Like, it's like we're starting over and doing something we're going back. It's like everybody's hitting the reset button every day and erasing all this history, and then we just go back to civil rights tactics. And that's what's so frustrating about it, you know? Because we have the history. We have people who've written, who've helped us understand what happened then, so we can get new solutions now. But like we were saying, people don't read and they just go and act. And so that's what it's like. We already know what happened. Why are we doing this again?
Right.
You know, so it's frustrating to see that.
Yeah, it's frustrating on the one hand. On the other hand, just as you said, this moment seems to be a moment that's similar to the pre-courts-oriented civil rights movement. So there are lots of young folks in the Black Lives Matter context that have experienced police brutality on a daily basis, that see violence as a legitimate and necessary form of protest. So all of this is potentially interesting, right? So this is potentially similar to when King visited Watts right after the rebellion, and he couldn't understand. And he was speaking with kids in Watts and basically calling them out. What the hell are you doing? And the kids are telling King that, Dr. King, we won. Because not only the whole world is watching, but we confronted the state with the instruments that we know and that we are willing to use over and over. That was pushed aside and it's resurfacing again. So that's one of the interesting, and I hate to use this word, but this is a potentially hopeful moment if those trends are kept away from the knocking on the door tendency. It's a humongous if. It's unlikely, yet it's on the table. So where will it go? We don't know. We have all indications that it's going to go the same way. Yeah. Folks love to be on CNN. They love to be on public television. They love to be visible. And even though it's a new form of leadership, the vocabularies and the strategies, the revolutionary strategies, the radical strategies are out of the table. So I don't know where these folks are getting their information from. So that's a huge issue. But I look at the the various strands within that movement. And I've got to admit that there's something in it that sounds very vital and can go in an interesting direction. If it does go in an interesting direction, though, I'm sure it's not going to be called Black Lives Matter anymore. It's going to be something else.
I think the interesting thing you said, I wanted to touch on two things about Black Lives Matter, because we've written a piece. We were highly critical of some of the quote-unquote leadership of Black Lives Matter. We were talking before this, and we were telling you how the struggle and dialectics of development to get our website up since the last time we saw you, I think maybe like in 2012. That was 3 years. Black Lives Matter pops on the scene after Ferguson. They get a website up like that. You look at one of this girl, one of the quote unquote, if you go on the internet and do some research, Alicia Garza, they say her claim to fame, she's an organizer, whatever that means in the Bay Area. And she's famous for one of the persons who coined the term slogan, Black Lives Matter. Now, I think, we was talking about we're a little older, and it's just like, how do we go from revolutionary nationalism to this milquetoast neoliberal Susan B. Komen Foundation talking about Our Lives Matter, and they talking about wearing a lapel pin similar to breast cancer, and the shit ain't even red, black, and green, it's red and black. And she's from the Bay Area, and there's a big anarchist culture up there. So I look at her, and then I've also seen her speaking at Ford Foundation gatherings.
Well, stop right there, yeah.
And there you go. And
that's the kiss of death.
And the kiss of death, and you talk about that, but the thing about it is, like Kwame Ture said, this struggle is eternal and it's always going on. And I want people to read Robert Allen, Black Awakening in Capitalist America, so you can get a history of how the Ford Foundation broke down the radical element of the African liberation movement when they threw that money in there because it wasn't coming from the people. That's what foundations, that's what grants do. So you got Alicia Garza, one of them that I know, right? And what she's trying to push forward, she'll say Black Lives Matter, but then she started to push an LBGQT, I forgot because they always add letters to it. And she's saying, well, we got to remember about the homosexuals and making sure this movement is accepting of people who have homosexual lifestyles. And it's like, wait a minute. Did Mike Brown get killed because he was a homosexual? No, it was African. You see, now that's what I have a problem with in terms of like, I don't care really if you are African and you all in the nation, and if you gay, you in the African nation, no matter what, okay? But if you put anything above being African, and I seen her talking at Ford Foundation, you can go on to YouTube, you can go on VMO, Ford Foundation. Robert Allen, I do my research. We got to look at the co-optation. Now, the rank and file, because I don't even know what the movement's asking for, right? Now, the rank and file, the youngsters, just going out here doing these things, doing these protests, I got love for them because I look at them as the young people who have not been conscientized, but they are being led astray. Exactly. Yeah. And so we need to, but these people, I think that Garza woman is, because it's 3 of them, but I know she probably around my age, but because she's not old enough to be considered old by young people, kind of like me, but she ain't young enough to where she don't know what she doing, right? And I know she's known as an organizer, and I've been to the Bay Area. I've seen their organizing. It's very foundation and granty. Right? Now, I want to talk about something you said about, like you said about the state earlier, because I remember something Walter Rodney said in Walter Rodney Speaks. He said, I'm a guerrilla intellectual. Walter Rodney Speaks, y'all need to check that out in the C101 library. Go ahead and get you a copy. Y'all need to read more. Now, he said, I'm not saying the struggle ain't going to be in the streets, but as a guerrilla intellectual, you don't give in to the university in terms of, you don't give no way. If you can get some stuff from the university, get it. Grab it. That's why we grabbed João, because he said I can be grabbed it. So we grabbing him. So you see, so we can't give up anything, because we guerrillas. We got to give, we can print the copies. You can get on everything we talking. But it's like you said, who are the interlocutors? I mean, we was talking about Amos Wilson beforehand. Yeah. And when I look at the Black Lives Matter, the quote unquote leadership, and I don't even know how they're organized. They're not even saying what's the goal. Are you a nationalist movement? Are you integrationist movement? You got people, Netroots Nation, busting in saying Black Lives Matter, interrupting stuff like that. Are you going to be rank and file mobilization for the Democratic Party, which it looks like you're going to be if I follow political trends, and I do for my people? So when I look at all this stuff going around, I think I lost my train of thought, but I was just saying in terms of like
you're asking basically what the hell Black Lives Matter is about, right?
Yeah,
right. And I can see you and
Zari
discomforted by what I said, and what I said was just this. I think that the movement brought in folks to recognize themselves as political subject in a way that hasn't happened in a while. And the question is whether they're going to follow the broader movement of knocking on the door or do something else. That's it. So Black lives don't matter. We know that.
Yes.
Right? So
what exactly?
So and I think some of these folks are out in the streets precisely because they recognize that. Right? Now, you back to square one, or you back to the legalist, integrationist approach when you forget that Black lives don't matter and focus all your energies in trying to make things work as if Black lives matter. Black lives will never matter under these circumstances.
Thank you.
So it's a huge contradiction there. And you're right that the very term of the movement, the Black Lives Matter, obviously signals to integration, to
externally directed,
full citizenship. So it is undoubtedly integrationist in that regard. It is reformist. And because reformist, bound to fail as a project that actually improves Black lives and Black people's lives. So in that regard, absolutely, it's bogus in that respect. So what can we see happening at this moment? What we can see happening at this moment, again, is perhaps something similar that was going on in the 50s when nationalist trends, revolutionary trends are all in the mix. You see what I'm saying?
I got that. That's what you were saying.
So
agree
those folks are in the mix. The folks who are not hesitating in confronting the police, the folks who are not hesitating in breaking private property and saying, screw private property. This is messing us up. So what's an interesting scenario coming out of this is that these folks begin to think about land, begin to think outside of the institutional mechanisms and vocabulary. Folks begin to say, you know what, we're not interested in this partisan politics. Right. We're not interested. We know what Ford Foundation is about. We know what negotiating with the Democratic Party and with the state is like. So we want that. We want nothing with that. And I think some of these young people can actually reach that conclusion. Yes. Right? So that's all I was saying.
No, now I see what you're saying, because it's kind of like, that's what I was saying. Because see, João, see, you be being positive. See, I thought you.
We have reached a weird ground, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
You have become more pessimist than me. And I'm going, no. Wait a minute.
This is what he just did. He just flipped the script. But it's funny.
Wait a minute.
It's funny you said that, because what you make me think of, because I just read over. Because I needed some clarity, because, sometimes shit just happens and I need to get away and go read. Yeah. I just reread Ready for Revolution. Exactly. And I remember when Fannie Lou Hamer went to the Democratic, we didn't come all this way for no 2 seats. She was a quote unquote illiterate sharecropper wife from Mississippi. Exactly. But when people get in motion to struggle,
exactly,
you end up conscientizing.
Wave and you're in the ocean.
That's right.
It doesn't mean you want to go to the same place.
That's right. And just like
Kwame, you get swept up. And that's what I'm saying.
That's exactly what you're saying. Yeah. Like, I remember some Kwame Ture said, you said all these different elements in them strengths in the mix.
Absolutely.
And like he said, just because we against something don't mean we for the same thing.
Absolutely.
So And the 60s was a dress shortage.
Absolutely. So this is
Look at you! Wow.
This is
Oh my God.
This is
gonna rain?
recent history representing itself. This time maybe as farce.
And I want to say that's why I was.
But let's not forget that revolutionary black folks were in the Panthers, were in the civil rights movement.
That's right.
And at one point they realized, you know what, this is not happening, and we'll do our thing.
And it's funny because, like, what I was gonna say is in terms of like when you say you know, me and you and I, all of us are kind of, we look at stuff, you know, kind of reading and kind of made out of experiences we had, and we can even look. And that's why the value of study is so important, because you can look at a term like Black Lives Matter, right? And I think of what Amos Wilson said in some of the works he's written. That's also available on our website that you guys can easily get, and also some of his YouTubes. But some of the things he said is, us as black folks are very externally directed. As a group, we need to be internally directed. Our movements need to be because when you're externally, it's always dependent. But that's because there's been a lack. We have been made to serve. We were brought to this hemisphere and also left back home and been planted, inculcated our identity to serve. We weren't taught to critically think. And then they say, you know how you know you critically think? Because you in the university. And so we think some of these black folks that's in the university can critically think, when the best critical thinker is the youngster on the block who know when that cop come, he say, oh no, sir, I was good now. And then when he leaves, say, man, that pig done left, dog. You know? So that's the thing we need to realize. We need to put, and we need to say that these kids, forget
the university, forget Black Studies in the U.S. That project is an integrationist project. It's the Black Lives Matter official project. So it's flower from the same sack, really. Where do you get this revolutionary knowledge? You get revolutionary knowledge from historical accumulated knowledge and from folks who have no other choice but come up with revolutionary knowledge. So if you're out there, folks around you are dying on a daily basis, folks around you are being shot, folks around you are being neglected by the state in education, healthcare, you will necessarily come up with an alternative project, a revolutionary project. So you're absolutely right. What is astounding to me, but I realize very naive of me, is to expect that intellectuals and Black Studies intellectuals at that be minimally engaged in revolutionary projects. You talk about revolutionary projects or even a revolutionary ethic or a revolutionary theory in Black Studies environments, in academic environments, you are laughed at. This is where we are at. So that there's a whole institutional process of ridiculing these types of approach, and what you get is the incessant repetition of the need for integration, recognition, multi-raciality. So that's what folks believe in. So we are in the era, it's a very Baldwinian era, and there's several Baldwins, I know this, but there's a Baldwin that wants the integrated country, that wants the full presence of Black folks recognized. And this is where we are at in all of these different scenarios that you painted. So in Black Studies, in Black Lives Matter, in Black movements across the diaspora, Brazil is no different. And that we got to a point in Brazil where even folks who are organizing around genocide are using the state as the main interlocutor.
That's crazy, right?
Right.
Who's doing it?
This is across the board. So that there's a strong anti-genocide movement in São Paulo. There's a strong one in Salvador, and these folks are very active, very important, and at the same time they are engaged in dialogues with either the state or state representatives, engaging civil society. So I haven't heard projects of autonomous communities, for example.
Well, here's
Black land, Black laws, Black alternative communities. There's none of that.
It's happening. We're going to start talking about it because we talk about it on the website. So see, now you've heard. Now we're in the building. Now the question is like you just said, it's like they want to influence power as opposed to gain power. But I'm just want to comment on basically what you said in terms of you said they're talking to the state, and the state is the one that's doing it, and it seems like we're repeating history. And a platitude is people, you're bound to repeat history if you continue to, if you don't study it, you'll repeat the history. And I remember something I read in Kwame Toure's from Black Power to Pan-Africanism. He said this. He said, "You can't repeat history. You can only repeat the same mistakes or same actions over different circumstances, changing conditions."
Yeah.
So as we go with this Garza or go with whatever, the foundation or whoever they with, whatever they claim, because I just want to know how you get access to all this media, this mainstream media. And y'all know what mainstream media's euphemism is, white media. How do you get to be the forefront of the Black Lives, even on Russia Today? When I go on Russia Today, how's the Black Lives Matter? And there's some organizations here that, that have a following that kind of do talk about land in terms of like, you got Brother Sara Sudasetti, Brother Polite, they be traveling and they talk about what they say. They say African world supremacy, right? That's what they talking about. But they don't get no pub. But if you look at who follow them, and they can get crowds like that, but you're never gonna hear about it.
Yeah. So that's the problem with these integrationist initiatives, that they crowd out the revolutionary approaches and vocabulary. That's exactly it. But again, don't get me wrong. I think that I'm all for localized improvements if they can be gotten. Go for it. That's not what I want to do, and that's not where the most important project is. Exactly. So do we want better infrastructure? Do we want free medical health care? Do we want a police that's not murderous or even community controlled? Those all sound like great ideas, but they are localized improvements that don't make a dent in the anti-Black structures of the world we live in. So go for it. This is your calling. This is great. But this is not going to change the fact that my 11-year-old son has been asking for a bulletproof vest. So the 11-year-old has figured it out. This world is not for him. Even if they reform the police, even if there's a recognition of anti-Blackness in certain sectors of our society. So healthcare maybe has an anti-Black streak. Whoa, this is great. Let's try to fix that. Even if all of these things are fixed within the confines of the state and public policy, it doesn't make our world any less anti-Black.
That's exactly the case.
So go for it. I have some respect for that, but that's not what's going to change our lives ultimately, right? It will be an adjustment. It will be an improvement of sorts, but it's not going to make Black lives any less obsolete. And that's what we are dealing with.
All right, everybody. That is the end of this episode of the Conscientization 101 podcast. And as you know, this was an excerpt. So if you want to finish listening to this interview in its entirety, all you have to do is go to conscientization101.com or c101magazine.com and subscribe today. You will have access as a subscriber to this particular interview and all of C101's interviews. Past, present, future, also access to much more. So go to our site, go to the subscription benefits page for full details, and most importantly, you will be supporting 100% independent media. This episode has featured sounds from Wise Intelligent. The song is Nothing from his forthcoming album, Stevie Bonneville Wallace. We want to thank João for taking the time to talk with us when we were in Austin. It was great. It was wonderful, as always. And don't forget to check us out on Twitter at Conscien1. That's CONSCIEN and the number 1. On Facebook at Conscientization 101 and Instagram at C101 Editors. Until next time, peace.